All right, what's up, everybody? I'm Brad. I am from Sports Magazines and History on YouTube, on Instagram, and I've got with me Mike from Slabs to Men. And this is kind of, in my opinion, a little bit of a momentous occasion because this is going to be our first podcast. This is going to be our first episode of a new podcast that we've put together called Mags and Slabs. And we are planning on just talking about magazines and Sports Illustrated and CGC and all that good stuff, and getting some discussion going and getting some dialogue, and something that we feel there's a little bit of a void in right now in this hobby. So before I ramble too much, I want to pass this back to Mike. Like I said, he's from Slabs to Men. Give him a follow on Instagram. And this was actually his idea. He approached me about this. We'd already been communicating a lot on Instagram and sharing different magazines back and forth. And then he kind of came to me with this idea, like, hey, what do you think? And, I'm all in. I love it. So Mike, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, your thoughts on this podcast, and just go ahead and take over. I'm passing it to you.
Thanks, Brad. I've been watching your videos. I've been watching Jim's videos. You guys got me really interested into this hobby. Fell in love with magazines, sports magazines. Fell in love with the idea of preserving them and grading them, and really having like these rare newsstand issues, specifically of these historic publications. So really got interested in it, and I was just found myself really craving more information. You guys were great with your videos, and I would always tune into them. But sometimes I'd be like at work, and I would, had all these card options, these card podcast options of guys just chatting away about cards, sports cards, which I liked and enjoyed. But I found myself really craving more information about sports magazines, and there was a little bit here and there. Jim has his podcast that comes out periodically, but I wanted more, and I wanted to hear a couple people chatting away about it. So that's why I came to you, and I thought maybe this would be a great idea, and I'm really excited to do this with you.
Yeah, I love it. I'm really glad that you did, because I am the exact same way. I crave more. I am constantly just looking up, I'm even looking at eBay past sales, or, as soon as there is any new video that comes out, there's just not a lot out there right now. And I think that there are some other collectors that feel similar to us, and they have found a passion and enjoyment with this hobby. And hopefully by us putting this together and just kind of talking about some different things going on with the hobby, hopefully some others will enjoy it too. So I think the initial plan right now, and obviously I'm just gonna, we're gonna be very open about this. This is our first time. We're just trying this out. There may be some mistakes here, and I'm also just gonna say I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Do not be surprised if at some point one of them bursts through the door in here, even though I've directed my wife to try and keep them at bay. So this is going to be a little rough around the edges, but we're just going to talk about the hobby and enjoy it. So I think right now the plan is we're going to shoot for once a month right now initially. I would love to try and up that a little bit to be a little more frequent, but we're going to kind of play it by ear at first, see how it goes. Obviously, if you're watching this right now, these are going to be posted to my YouTube channel, Sports Magazines and History. And then Mike, I know you're going to take care of putting this as an audio version, as a podcast on some different platforms. Do you know what platforms you're planning on putting this all on right now?
I plan on putting in all the typical ones, like Spotify is an obvious one, and on Apple as well. So
okay.
Any of like the major ones that you would find podcasts should have this going forward. But I'm still weeding out exactly all the platforms, but you should expect it in all the normal places.
Perfect. So, if you're watching or listening and this is something you're interested in, then that's something you can look for. Once again, this podcast we've labeled it Mags and Slabs. You can see there we got a nice logo that Mike designed, and we're actually planning for future episodes. We're also planning on live streaming on YouTube. So with this first one, we really just wanted to kind of test it out and get this under our belts and make sure we can figure out what we're doing. But the goal is for future episodes, we're going to do it live so that we can encourage people to jump on and maybe chat or ask a question and get a little bit of interaction back and forth, and see if that works. So that's our general thought for the format of the podcast, and kind of what our plans are moving forward. But let's also talk briefly, Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and how did you get started in the hobby? What's your background in the hobby, and what is it specifically that interests you about the sports magazines?
Sure. So I'm a product of the 80s and 90s. I experienced what was considered, I guess, now the junk wax era, and was all in at that time. I was collecting with everybody else, Shaquille O'Neal's and whoever else was big in the early 90s. So somewhere around, to be honest, I believe it was the Ken Burns baseball documentaries that
Love
came
that.
out. And what was that? That was in mid 90s, somewhere in the early 90s, maybe early mid 90s. And I was just bit, I loved sports history, and it was just such a deep well of all these characters, and they tied into different eras of in history. And it was just so interesting to me. The batting, all the batting statistics, how they like ebbed and flowed into the different eras. Some of the statistics in some eras were like cartoon-like, and then they became very pedestrian again, and then they're cartoon-like again. And it's just like, to me, very interesting. So that was something that really piqued my interest in vintage. And eBay came around not far after that. So this was maybe the mid 90s at this point. And all of a sudden, I'm finding Babe Ruth cards and Ty Cobb cards right there in front of me. And my local card shops didn't have these things. And the card shows did, but I was this kid that was way too scared to even ask what these things cost, or if they were available, or if they'd sell it to some punk kid like myself. So I wasn't even going to inquire about a Ty Cobb when I was a kid at a card show. But on eBay, I was like, okay, there they are. That's the price. Maybe I could figure something out. And I started to work myself towards actually picking up vintage stuff. And I got really into vintage cards probably earlier than most people that I would say that were my age. I was probably in my first couple of years of college, and this is the mid 90s. And I was really going in deep on vintage cards, and mostly pre-war. I continued to add here and there over the years. I kind of went away from the hobby like so many others did. In the 2000s, I kind of was just here and there picking up stuff, but still following sports, but not really buying as many things, not adding to my collection, but I still had my collection. But I came back around 2015, 2016 or so, and I started getting more things again, started filling in holes in my collection. I was still interested in the vintage stuff, but I was also checking out some modern for the first time in a long time. I'm a big LeBron fan. I know you're not, but I'm a big LeBron fan. And I was like really picking up a lot of LeBron stuff. That was right around the time where he and the Cavs pulled off their big upset over the Golden State Warriors. So that was an interesting time to kind of like start picking up stuff. This was before the boom, as you know. And, I did pretty good about just building up a collection again before then. And, here we are. I guess the magazines, I stumbled into one of Jim's videos, and he delivered it with such enthusiasm. And he really spoke about each of these magazines, about how they are like a work of art. And he would talk about like the people that were depicted on them, like this is their first magazine that came out in like this such and such year. And there's only but so many of these, and most of the hardcore collectors, I would say, are really into like Newsstand, and there's only but so many of these floating around. And I'm somebody that really appreciates rarity, so like all these things kind of came into play, and I really thought it was really quite interesting. And actually, even coming across a lot of your videos, Brad, really heightened my interest even further as well. But it's been a lot of fun. And it still feels like it's very early in this hobby. So there is that excitement again. The cards are obviously, the cards are so, it's such a mature market comparatively. And this still felt like there was a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I feel that too for sure. I think that's part of what's so exciting about it. And I'm fairly similar. I'm a '90s kid, and I really started getting into cards as a young guy, like '96, '97, and had no idea, how value really worked, and any of, I just knew that I liked to collect this, Steve Young and Jerry Rice and Kobe Bryant. I like to collect the guys that I liked to watch on TV, and so accumulated a pretty large bulk of, not very high value collection of cards, mostly '90s and early 2000s. And then as I got older into high school and college, kind of drifted away, and would still picked up a few packs here and there, but not very often. And then it wasn't until the COVID boom that I got back into it, and, pulled out all my boxes and binders of all my old cards and started going through those, and kind of got reinvigorated into that for several months during COVID. And I think I told this story on one of my YouTube videos, so I won't go into too much detail. But I remember I was browsing one day, I think in 2021 on eBay. Gosh, I was kind of in I was in I don't know, a rut for a while, just like nonstop looking for cards and deals on eBay, and I needed to get out of it. So I'm glad I did. I stumbled upon like this old magazine from, I don't know, I don't remember. I think it was in the '50s, and it was a sport magazine. It wasn't even Sports Illustrated. And it had like Wilt Chamberlain and Jackie Robinson and Willie Mays. And
Yep.
I remember looking at that magazine on eBay. It just happened, whatever was in the title just happened to pull up in the search that I was looking at. And I was like, man, that's pretty cool. That looks to me like, I wonder if that has any value. And me, similar to you, I'm so passionate and in love with the history side of things. I mean, I'm fascinated by that. Like, the 9 innings documentary you mentioned by Ken Burns, I could watch that all day long. Like
Yep.
that's what I do. I just sit there on YouTube and search old YouTube or old documentaries of these past players. And so I love the history angle. And so I started looking into that, and I stumbled onto Jim's videos because I started searching. I knew that magazines could be graded just very vaguely. I had seen it kind of in the periphery from my card collecting, but I didn't know anything about it. And then that one magazine led me to stumble onto Jim's videos. And hey, we can't have a podcast episode about graded magazines without mentioning Jim. We've already mentioned him several times. So
Absolutely.
my man Jim, I'm sure you'll watch this. And for those who may not know, CGC Sports Illustrated is his handle on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. So make sure you follow him if you're interested in this. He's definitely one of the godfathers of this hobby, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, and then it snowballed for me from there. And I'm with you. I think the rarity of the newsstands, I think the newness of the hobby, and it's just kind of, it almost feels like an unexplored frontier. But then just the nostalgia and the history that's tied to the covers, the aesthetics, the display, the beauty. I love how, unlike sports cards, which obviously you and I still have quite an affinity for sports cards, but unlike the sports cards, with the sports magazine covers, it's like that is a singular moment in time when that, whoever athlete was on the cover, and it could be tied to, they were on the cover for a reason, whether it be, it's not always, sometimes it is a huge iconic moment like the, Miracle Hockey defeating the Russians, but other times it may just be because, well, they did a profile, a story on that player that week. But it's date stamped, and you can go back to exactly what was happening in sports then. And I just love it, and the graded aspect makes it really cool and fun. So that's kind of how and then obviously I jumped in with both feet and started making YouTube videos about it. And I'm now, it's been just over a year since I posted my first YouTube video. So I think it's an awesome hobby. And it's been cool also to see more and more collectors, it seems like, become interested. So Mike, let's go ahead and kind of jump to what I would consider our first real topic that we've got planned tonight. Newsstand. and subscription, and probably one of the first questions that new interested collectors ask about. And why don't you just kind of start and talk a little bit about your thoughts on newsstand versus subscription, where you feel like they have each of them has their own place in the hobby, and that type of thing.
Sure. So, like yourself, I am a product of the School of Jim, and he, taught us well. Newsstand is much much more rare than subscription issues, and even more so than comic books. The discrepancy between the gulf is huge. I forget the exact stats. I think it's like, maybe you remember, it was something like, out of how many millions, only a small
Yeah, they
percentage of
say,
that,
yeah, I think 3% is the number
3%.
that is,
Uh,
thrown around there.
right. So it's vastly different. And as a collector, we really do appreciate that aspect. It's hard to ignore that. Obviously, they look much nicer without a big old label, some random person's address. Those are very distracting. It takes a little bit away from me from what the magazines really are representing to me, and that's the player or the event on the cover. Um, some of the subscriptions, they have the white box if they were packed in like the plastic sleeves or whatever when they were mailed out. Those are a little bit more palatable to me, but even those are technically subscriptions, so they don't fall into the same camp as far as rarity. So I really appreciate newsstands for that reason. I only collect those if I can help it. I have a couple subscriptions that were just old editions from a long time ago. I have Jordan's first pro cover as a subscription, just because that was like something I got in the mall. Somebody, at people set up like some cards and magazines, and I grabbed it. But other than that, I've been newsstand all the way. As far as where their places are, I do believe there is a place for subscriptions in this hobby, and I actually hope that it has a larger place in this hobby as this matures, because I kind of feel that that is going to be, at least to some degree, the key to this really becoming what all it can be. Newsstands are always going to be, the cream of the crop as far as this hobby is concerned. Certainly, like the older ones. Some of these magazines, there's only a couple of these guys floating around in Newsstand. It's really amazing. It's amazing that you even have one in your hand sometimes. There's so few of them. But the subscriptions they still came out at the same time. They still represent that event. They still represent that player. And they're still beautiful. They still display nicely. So I do believe that they have some, value as far as what they are in and of themselves. The fact that there's so many of them is always going to repress the monetary side of it, however. But not everybody is going to want to shell out tons of money if they just love, for instance, this Cassius Clay cover that we're looking at on screen. There's very few of those in Newsstand floating around. So if somebody values that, it's still kind of cool to have a subscription of that, that came out in 1963 in their hands. That was still, somebody was reading that back in 63, reading up on this new boxer coming up, that's
That
still
was
kind of
60
cool.
years ago now, too.
It's a long time ago. And it still is a moment in time. It's still, a transaction between the sports fan and what was going on in sports and in that era. So I think that there is still a place for subscription. And like I said before, I hope that it's a growing place. I hope that it becomes even more so, especially for like these iconic and flagship issues.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, the newsstands they're the premiums. I mean, they're the ones that could, potentially carry some long-term value because of that rarity aspect. But I think, as you said, if this hobby is going to continue to grow, subscriptions are going to play a role because, once again, some of these key issues in newsstand are so hard to find, and you mentioned, there's only a handful, and I could name some of the big issues like, Pele or Bill Russell. Like I know for a fact that their first covers there are currently less than 10 newsstands that have been graded by CGC. Now there's some other ones out there, and that's part of the fun about this right now is, like I said, it's kind of like the Wild West.
Yep.
There are newsstands laying around, whether it be in an antique store or in a library or in someone's garage or somewhere online that, isn't eBay, but is maybe more obscure. And they're out there to be found right now because it's still so early in really, the conception of this hobby as it in its current form. But still, they're rare, they're difficult to find. And I think something that is really important is, even with the subscription issues, and even though, for many of them there were millions printed, what I do know as far as numbers go is Sports Illustrated in the early 80s had subscription numbers of over 3 million. I know that in 1956, which was their third year of the publication, and I know this because that was the year Mickey Mantle's first cover came out, their circulation at the time was 600,000.
Oh, wow.
So, but even with those numbers, one thing to think about with magazines versus sports cards is the survivability. I mean,
100%.
I get it that in the 50s and even 60s, kids were putting the cards in their bicycle spokes and throwing them away. I get that was kind of a factor back then.
There may have been some special kid out there that had a magazine in the middle of their spoke.
There could have been, yeah. But I just feel like with a magazine, the common conception or the common perception with the magazine is that it's disposable. How many magazines did we have in our home over the years, whether it was ours or our parents or whatever, and you look at it, you read it, whatever, and you pitch it in the trash. Now, many of us, me included, we kept our stacks and stacks of Sports Illustrated because even then, even before this collecting hobby as it is now was anywhere even close to our radar, we recognized, these are pretty cool and there's some historical significance to these. I don't want to just throw this away. I kind of treasured them even as a kid, and that's why I kept them. But still, so many of these got just thrown in the trash. And so that's why I think, even the subscription copies, even though they're never gonna, for the most part, there are a few exceptions, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, but they're not going to carry a lot of value. But still, I mean, like you were talking about the Cassius Clay, and we said that was 60 years ago. How many of those are left, even of the subscription issues? Because I think it's safe to say the majority, I'd be willing to pay a lot of money that over 50% of them were pitched in the trash.
Yep.
And so, once again, if there were 600,000 Mickey Mantle first covers printed and over 300,000 of them have been pitched, and it's probably a lot higher than that. I don't want to speculate too much, but I think that subscriptions are a way for people to still be able to enjoy the covers and the history. And I agree with you. I think that they're going to definitely play a part in this hobby growing.
Certainly up to a certain year, I think they have an obvious place, even for what we're just talking about.
Yeah.
I completely agree. And you're absolutely right. They were considered disposable, more so than cards even.
Yeah, for sure. I think way more so than cards,
Yeah.
Especially once you get into, I think by the 70s, people had kind of figured out a little bit that there was, you probably needed to be holding on to sports cards.
Yep.
And magazines, I mean, even today,
now,
most people are throwing away magazines.
100%. Absolutely. You can go to any flea market and they're just sitting there next to, some crap that they just don't want, that they still have for whatever reason, but I don't think they're expecting much out of it.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's jump to our next topic, which is the state of the market. I know you and I both follow pretty closely a lot of the sales that happen. And so what are your feelings and thoughts right now about just where this hobby is as far as the buying and selling of magazines?
I think that I'm definitely noticing raw issues of newsstands are at least the asking prices seem to be going up for raw newsstands, especially for some of the big flagship issues. As far as the graded issues, and this is not across the board completely, but largely, I'm starting to see cheaper prices than I expected when I first entered just a handful of months back. Um, some things that I just tonight I saw Wayne Gretzky first covers, and for really cheap. One was a 7 CGC 7 and one was a 6. I think the 7 sold for, oh man, 450 or something like that, and
Yeah,
the
I was gonna say I
6
think they're both well over a grand, or well, I'm sorry,
in the
well under a
past.
grand. Yeah,
Oh yeah, I think so. I think tonight I can look it up. I believe it's 450 the 7 and 350 or around there for the 6. Um, and I feel like a handful of months ago, there's kind of unheard of prices. I know that the graded market is still trying to find its sort of its legs. It's still so sporadic. Like things are just it's all these magazines are being like graded all of a sudden, and you know um I think that's it's still trying to figure out like what its place for each of these magazines really is. So up until I guess maybe even now, it's a lot of guesswork was involved in what things really were truly worth. When there's so few, when the population is so small, as it has been for so many of these, you can kind of slap any price tag you want on it. And if you have a handful of people that think that it's, worthwhile, you're going to start getting some big numbers. But as more of these come back from grading, as we're starting to see, I think that is starting to affect prices. That combined with just the collectibles market in general has been increasingly soft over the past couple of years, and seems to be continuing, in my opinion. So the ones that just ended today, the CGC 7 first cover Gretzky sold for 480, and a 6. Actually, I don't see the 6 sale. The 7 sold for 480. So to me, that's much lower than I would have expected up to this point.
yeah. I don't know if you threw I or if you saw I threw that Gretzky sale up on the screen.
Oh, did you?
Um,
Okay.
let's see what it looks like. It says the 6.0 actually went for 750. So the 6.0 went for higher, but that one was a buy it now, and someone made an offer, and the
I
offer
see.
got accepted. But the 7.0 went on auction. There was only 2 bids, went for 480.
Right.
And just for some context for anyone listening who may not know, but a 9.4
Yeah.
Gretzky newsstand sold for $30,000 in, I'm pretty sure it was February of 2022. So about a year and a half ago, a 9.4 sold for 30 grand. So I would say a 7.0 at 480 is, I mean, to me, that's a pretty good deal. That's a lower price than I would expect, I guess I should say.
Absolutely. The question is that truly the value? Is that truly value, or is it just a product of like a soft market at the moment, or perception of a lot of things coming in from CGC?
Yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, I've heard people, and I agree with to a large extent, that say the value of something is what someone's
Yeah.
willing to pay for it, and
Yeah.
in this case, but also, when it's an auction on eBay, who knows how many eyes were on it. But I do think that the market for collectibles, as you said, has really kind of tanked over the past year or so,
Yeah.
especially compared to where it was. I guess I would say it's more corrected itself than tanked, because a lot of the figures that we were seeing during the COVID boom were pretty unrealistic.
Right.
I also think you mentioned the bulk of graded magazines coming back from CGC. I think that's playing a huge role, because you and I know this, but CGC was basically doing a horrible job for a long time of grading and getting back
Yeah.
all these sports magazines. Okay. They focus on comics. They, that's their bread and butter. And the magazines were not getting a lot of attention. And so we were looking at wait times of literally like 14 and 15 months. It was insane. You were having to wait over a year to get your magazine back to be graded. And I think that was a huge deterrent for people to enter the hobby. Well, then CGC, they got these new magazine slabs. They upgraded them, which is a huge improvement from the previous ones, which were really flimsy. So they got newer slabs. And when they did that, they simultaneously, I don't know if they hired and trained a bunch of new people or changed their process or what, but all of a sudden they started getting all these. I mean, they literally had a huge backlog of about a year's worth of magazines that all of us collectors had sent in. And I think just now, like literally within the past few weeks, they've caught up to that, because I just now have seen movement on my issues that I have sent since the backlog, since they start working on that. I just saw movement on my first batch, my newer batch. So that indicates to me that they've finally gotten through that backlog. But they've improved their wait times from, like I said, over a year to now they've got listed on their website 30 days. And so what has happened is over the past 2 to 3 months, as you kind of alluded to, there's just been a flood of slabs coming back to the people that had submitted them. And in turn, we've seen a flood of slabs hit eBay and hit these other marketplaces.
Right.
And I think that's definitely had an effect on some of these prices, because the market, in my eyes, is really oversaturated with sellers right now. And there's not as many buyers. And, with some of those collectibles during COVID, whether it be video games or sports cards or comics, there were some people in it to make money, and people did make money. And I hope there's not a crazy amount of that in the sports magazine hobby, because I know that you and I are in it more for the enjoyment. And of course, the value aspect is always fun, and that adds to it. That's a thrill for me to know, oh, this magazine that I own is worth this. And I will sell the occasional magazine, especially to help fund so that I can buy more. But who knows if some of these people that have gotten into the hobby and have been flooding the market are only in it because they saw this as a way to make a quick buck. So I just think that as this hobby grows and it's still fairly new, there's definitely more of a supply right now, especially because of that huge backlog from CGC coming back, than there is a demand for people buying these issues. And because of that, and on top of the economy being down, people having less disposable income, I think there's some good deals to be had, much more so now than there was even 6 months ago.
100%. Absolutely. It's interesting, you're mentioning people may be coming in to make some money, and that we definitely saw that during COVID for cards. I don't know what the percentages were, but it was a lot of new people who were coming in and flipping cards, and it was this whole wave. And there may be some of that, like you said, with magazines right now, but I feel like the more people that I'm meeting in this hobby seem to, many of the people I'm meeting seem to really be into the history of these things. And even so, even if people are coming into this hobby, the magazine space, with the intention of finding things, and it's fair to find things in the wild to grade. I mean, that's part of, we're preserving them anyways. We want to. But even if they are in this to make money, that will eventually come back to the collectors. In the end, that's going to dictate what the real value of things are. And we both
there's
know
a place for that, for sure.
And we all know, actually, that are in this hobby, at least in Newsstand, there's only but so many of these things to go around. When all the dust settles, when everyone gets all their CGC slabs back from this big wave, And even if it continues, there's still only but so many of these to go around.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at the next topic. So I know this was one that you had put on there, Mike. Tell me, what are your thoughts and what are you wanting to discuss as far as market value matrix?
I would just love to like truly know what some of these things should be should be worth. So if I want something, I could feel comfortable spending a few $100 on something and not feel like I'm going to get burned in a week or two. And I think that only comes with like a volume of sales.
Yeah.
And that's what's kind of interesting about this, that some of these you just can't get that because there's just so few. Um, we talked about some of the other aspects that are affecting price. Some of these prices, we were talking about maybe some of these prices were inflated. Maybe right now some of these prices are the opposite, because some of these are truly too rare to go for some of the prices that I see some of these things going for, in my opinion. If people aren't in a place where they feel comfortable investing in things, then they're not going to do it and they're going to save their money. We've been watching cards go down for the past several years. I don't blame people for wanting to sit on the sidelines for a while. In fact, I've even done that myself to a large degree. So as far as matrix, I think it really just comes from like a desire to have some organized, I guess, some organized tiers for me to like turn to, where that I would really be able to know what things are worth and be able to transact in this hobby with the intention that, oh, this is an investment over a period of time, and not have a fear of being burned immediately from something going for $500 less a week later. Just for seemingly almost no real reason, even if there's only 5 or 10 of these things floating around.
Yeah, it's tough because with sports cards, we're so used to being able to look and see, oh, there are 200 PSA 10s of Albert Pujols rookie card. There are 500 PSA 9s, and this is the average selling price for each of those. Like you said, the volume is just not there. Obviously the volume's not there on sales, but the volume's not even there just on number of, copies graded right now. When you look at some of the sports cards and other collectibles, I know there's kind of the adage or the thought that if you have a 1 of 1, let's say you've got a 1 of 1, it's really difficult to price a card that is serialed 1 of 1, right? And in a lot of ways, the seller can basically set their price, and they can say, hey, this is the only one of this item, so if you want it, this is what I'm setting it for. And maybe no one bites and maybe no one wants to pay that, but really the seller has that right, and it is fair for them to pretty much list it at whatever they want because it's the only one. And there are so many slabs right now. There are so many Sports Illustrated and other sports magazine issues that have been graded that right now are a pop 1 of 1, none higher.
Yeah.
And there's just no, like you said, there's no consistent way of knowing what those really should go for. And so I definitely, you can go on eBay and you definitely see a lot of really high-end slabs listed, and the prices look astronomical. And I'll be the first to admit, I don't sell very many, and I've only got a handful of items listed on my eBay store, but I do have 2 or 3 that they're 1 of 1 items right now when you look at the census. And so I threw them up there at a really high price. I'm like, hey, this is the only one of this, and if someone wants it, then this is what I'll list it for. Sure. And it's just so much different than what we see with some of the other collectibles, in terms of quantity. Now I will say I'm 100% confident that a price guide is coming. and will be coming. And I think that will be a really big boost. And I think that will get more people interested and get people feeling a little more confident when they can accurately track, even though they aren't, even though the sales are more far and few between than sports cards. It will help whenever people have something reliable to be able to see what has happened.
I definitely agree with all that. I on the other side of that coin, I see some things listed that are, to me, very desirable items that are very low pop,
Yeah.
vintage, slab with a high grade sometimes, and they have it at what I would consider a reasonable price, but they're not getting bites. And I worry sometimes that they might be in some personal situation where they're like, "Oh, I need to move this. I'm willing to take whatever. I got this raw somewhere at a garage sale. I'll take whatever for it, and I have a little bit of concern that's going to skew comps that way. Um, of course, everyone has the right to sell their item whatever they want to, and if nobody is going to buy at a certain price, it should dictate that. But um, in my opinion, the values could really swing wide because of these various reasons. Certainly during a soft market like this, it's just really hard to get concrete numbers.
I think you're totally correct, but I do think that even if there are, really nice high grade newsstand copies that can be purchased for, what we would consider a great value right now and much lower than what we think that they really should go for. I think that over the long term, as collectors learn and understand more about the hobby and about the rarity, I think that will correct itself.
I
And I
agree.
think I look at the comics as really my comparison for that, because a lot of similarities to what we're doing and with comics. But comic collecting and selling and grading has been popular for much longer than Sports Illustrated's. And I think if you compare comic prices 10 years ago to comic prices today, I think you'll really see that, where there were probably quite a few what we would consider to be key issues. And if we look at some of the prices they went for 10 years ago, we would be stunned. But now, as the hobby has really grown, and there's just a lot more education about it and more understanding of the census and the pop reports, now you see some of those issues when it's a really high grade and a really low pop of a key issue. The prices are pretty crazy sometimes. So I do think that eventually, as this hobby continues to grow, because there's no doubt in my mind it will, just based off of how cool it is. And I haven't talked to a single person who likes sports about this hobby who hasn't said, "Wow, that's awesome." Or, when I
Agreed.
show them one of my slabs, they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's freaking cool."
Sure.
Everyone that I've talked to feels that way. So I really think over the long term, once again, it may be 10, could be 20 years, I don't know, but I think eventually people are going to start to realize the rarity of those newsstands, and I think that the value will trend more upwards at that time. But like you said, right now, this is a great time to pick up
Agreed.
some pretty big issues, in my opinion. In whatever high grade, low grade, these newsstands are so hard to find really in any condition sometimes, but I think there's some good stuff to be found right now. All right, everyone, thanks so much for listening up to this point. With this being our very first go at a podcast episode, we went a little bit longer than planned. So we decided to split this episode into two parts. We're going to wrap part one up right here. So stay tuned next week for part two. Thanks again for listening to Mags and Slabs.